the notion that soreness after a workout indicates that the workout was effective is just so deeply ingrained in our exercise culture. So we all know that soreness the next day indicates that the workout was awesome, and that in fact burning during the workout also indicates that the workout's awesome. But is this in fact true? Well, stick around and we'll workshop all through the science and find out if it is true, and if it is true, what you need to do to get more of it, and if it's not true, what you need to do to get less of it.
Okay, well, let's get into some DOMs.
Yeah, so why do you like a good set of DOMs?
So I've kind of I try and think, when did I first discover DOMs?
Well, DOMs obviously is just
been
the soreness you get after exercise, right, when you work out a lot.
You remember on your birthday episode, you're like, what did you just call me? That's what we're talking about. That's actually where we decided that would be a good idea for a whole episode. I have loved getting delayed onset muscle soreness, meaning, that feeling the next day that shows up after a workout when you're like, oh, yeah, that's right, it really worked. My butt or my thighs or my abs or my whatever. Rarely do we go, oh, yeah, really loving those neck DOMs and really loving those lower back DOMs, but I'm growing to love them. But I've been a fan of the DOMs since I was a teenager. And, yeah, used to love doing a good ab session or good workout at the gym and feeling sore the next day. And I absolutely equated it with that meant I had pushed myself hard enough. That meant it was effective. And I'm really looking forward to this episode to understand the evidence around it, because, guys, I'm not sitting here going, hey, I know what Raph, I haven't, Raph's done the research on this one, so I'm not sitting here going, I know what the answer is, because for me, psychologically, I still fucking love getting DOMs. I love it. Laura Sagers and I co-taught a masterclass the other week, and I think it was a bit of fun having each other there to torture. Smashed each other, and we think everyone else partaking in that class. I woke up in the morning. What did we do? My butt was that sore. Then by the end of that that next day, my low abs were on fire to the point it was hard to laugh. She's messaging me going, what's wrong with us? I'm in so much pain right now. What did we do? And yeah, I love it. And the last time I went to the gym and did my first heavy leg press session for a long time, that was almost a bit too much. That was 4 days. Yeah, 4 days of sort of, almost debilitating.
And
I still loved it though.
All right. So is it, you said, because it feels like, that you push yourself really hard, right?
It feels like that for me, and I would say that this would be for a lot of my clients too, because the narrative from my clients when I was teaching Bondi was the popular teachers were the ones that left them feeling sore for the next couple of days. They wanted the teacher where they felt like they had a hard time walking up the stairs the next day, or they had a hard time laughing because their abs were so sore.
Oh, all right. Well, great. Thanks for that insight. That's freaking awesome. And you know what? I reckon that gives me a fantastic idea about the outcomes for this episode. So I want to look at the evidence on okay, is it actually important to get sore? Is being sore an indicator that you did an effective workout? And what about soreness during the workout as well? And then at the after that, we can look at if clients persist, if clients desire that sensation, right? If they seek that sensation of that's evidence that there was a great class and I'm going to go back to that class next week, right? Well, wouldn't it be great if we had extra skills in our back pocket about how to induce more DOMs?
Oh, yeah, totally.
Yeah, so stick around to the end and we'll give you some tricks.
I feel like going mwah.
Yeah, we'll use our powers for evil.
I freaking love the idea of that.
Okay, great.
Awesome.
So what about soreness during? Is that something that you seek out? When your bum's burning or your abs are burning or whatever.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Not always. Okay. In my own personal work, like if I'm just, let's say, going through the OG Pilates repertoire in a flow, I'm actually not seeking that out, interestingly, right? However, if I'm doing a session at the gym, or if I'm doing like a HIIT session or something, yes, that is kind of my indicator, you know, because you're getting to that point just prior to failure. That starts to hurt and shake and all of that. So I'm absolutely seeking that out as a, this is, you know, yeah, when I go for a run, I'm actively trying to get uncomfortable.
And is part of that because you want to build the mental discipline, the mental toughness?
I don't think it is what it is for me. For me, it's just about pushing my body to that point where it's getting a workout. Do you know what I mean? Where I'm either stimulating strength or I'm pushing into cardio. Yeah.
So let me pose this hypothetical question.
I was just going to say though, just before the hypothetical question, because I just answered for me, for my clients, and what I've consistently seen over the near on 9 years of teaching group Pilates classes, I'm sorry, the majority, and I know that won't be everyone, and I know, for instance, Nick Maz, she does, so Nick Maz, our general manager, she doesn't like to push to that, like doesn't like to feel that burn in Pilates. That's not her goal. You don't either? No. Right. I will tell you right now though, the majority of clients who are going to a group reformer or group mat class, 100%, including in beginners, whatever level, expect to be points throughout that class where they're reduced to, oh my God, my bom's so on fire, or my abs are so on fire, or my arms are so on fire, I don't want to do another rep. And that definitely correlates with, that was a good workout.
Right. All right, so let me pose this hypothetical question, and you can answer it for you and also for these clients, right? So just say you went to a class, and at no point during that class were you sore. You're like, oh, this is pretty easy, right? But then the next day you woke up and you go to spring out of bed and you're like, ooh, silent but deadly.
It's happened to me before, actually.
So how do you judge? Was that a good class, not a good class?
It has, so it's not even hypothetical because it has happened to me before. I remember once I went to, it was years ago, I went to a beginner's mat class and the class was very slow, very, very slow. We were in positions for quite a long period of time. I didn't feel intense like, oh my God, I'm almost at failure at any point throughout it. The next day I woke up with the most insane, inner thigh, DOMs, legs, everything. I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. My brain goes, that was actually an effective workout. I didn't waste my time.
So do you even consider...
And I don't think I'm different to a lot of people.
So would you even consider that like a higher level of skill to teach a class that like during the class it like seems easy, but then afterwards it's like it really gets you?
No, I don't know that that's necessarily a high level of skill. Because there's many reasons why
I'm not saying it is.
No, but there's many reasons why I could have been that sore, right? You know, maybe I hadn't been doing any adductor inner thigh work, right? So my tissue's deconditioned to that. Any level of what I do, I'm probably going to get, potentially going to get a bit sore. I don't know. We're going to explore the science on it. But what I will say that what you constantly hear in studios is that is what the clients want. So you got to give the clients what they want, right? Or are they going to come back to that class? Are they going to, no. Do you know what I mean? That's kind of anyway, take it away. Hit me with some facts, man. I'm sitting here chomping at the bit for some facts. I know how I feel about it, but I want to hear some facts. Like what even are DOMs?
Well, the short answer is we don't really know what DOMs are.
I thought that was the case.
The DOMs is kind of the layperson's term for it. In the literature, it's called EIMD, exercise-induced muscle damage, and which just means the same thing, right? But basically, DOMs, starts 6 to 48 hours after you start your work, after you finish your workout, So usually it's kind of like the next day, but sometimes it can be a couple of days before it kicks in. And then it lasts 1 to 3 days, sometimes even 4 days if it's really severe. And after you do a real extreme workout, we can measure, like if you do a blood test or something, we can measure more bits of cells floating around in your blood. And that's because if you burst some muscle cells and tears the walls of some muscle cells or whatever during the workout, because it's a really fatiguing workout, the innards of those cells are going to leak out and float around in your bloodstream. And then we give you a blood test and we go, oh, they've got cell bits inside your, in your blood. So that tells us that there's been damage to your muscle cells, right?
Yep.
And so we can measure that, straight after the workout, 6 hours, 12 hours, 24 hours, 48 hours, etc. after the workout. And we can see it, the muscle damage peaks at a certain time, like maybe, 12 or 24 hours after the workout. And then it goes down as the cells are repaired, right, over a few days. And what we find is that doesn't correlate with how much soreness you have.
Right.
Right. So the soreness has its own trajectory that goes, 1 or 2 or 3 days. Right. And the damage has its own trajectory,
right,
but the curves don't match. Right. So you can be super sore 3 days after your workout, but actually there was minimal damage.
Right.
Or you can have a lot of, cell parts floating around your blood, but you're not that sore.
Right.
Right. So the presence of soreness seems to correlate with the presence of damage. Right. So if you've got some soreness after your workout, it probably means that there was some muscle damage.
Right.
Right. But how much soreness you have doesn't correlate with how much muscle damage there was. And how long the soreness takes to go away doesn't tell you how quickly the damage is repaired.
Okay. So this word damage doesn't have the nicest connotation, does it?
No.
Oh, dramatic pause, everyone. No, it doesn't. Could we explore what you mean by damage a little more, please?
When did you hear someone say damage, but in a good way?
So, do we mean muscle growth?
No, damage.
Literally damage.
Literally damage, like literally bursting the walls of your muscle cells, ripping the cell inner parts from their structural foundations and spewing them out into the bloodstream.
Yeah, I just got some nocebo thrown at me across the desk, you guys. No, but so... I need more.
All right, so,
is it good to damage your muscles?
Maybe, probably not.
Oh. Is it detrimental to damage your muscles?
Probably.
This just took a turn for the worst. I did not know this was coming. Maybe we should brief before these episodes.
No, I think this is great. Nice and spontaneous.
I'm here with all the facial expressions, you guys.
So, all right. So, can we just back up a little step?
We need to.
I want to start this story with. So, your muscles are made up of muscle cells, right? Just like all of your body parts are made up of. Your liver's made up of liver cells, and your bones are made up of bone cells, and all of that. And so, each muscle cell is the full length of. It's a little tube, right? It's a little cylinder. Your muscle cell. And it's the full length of a muscle, right? So the muscle cells in your biceps, they're the full length of your upper arm, right? So they might be like 20, 30 centimeters long, right? And each muscle cell is, depends, the width of the muscle, the diameter of the muscle cell is different in different people because as you do strength training, your muscle cells get bigger, right? So each individual cell gets bigger. So the size might range from, let's say, 50 microns to 100 microns. And a micron is 1,000th of a millimeter, right? So 100 microns, the biggest muscle cells. So this is like someone who does a lot of strength training, like a bodybuilder, right? Would have a muscle cell that would be like 100 microns, which is a 1/10th of a millimeter.
Would you do a lot of...
Yeah, but I'm talking about like Mr. Universe or something, like people
Arnold
that are like
Schwarzenegger?
have to, Arnold Schwarzenegger in his heyday. Like people who have to turn sideways to go through doors. And whereas in the average person, it might be 50 microns, which is 1/200th of a millimeter, right? And so if you think about like a fine human hair, right, that'd be roughly 80 or 100 microns. Right, so basically, the smallest, the finest thing that you could see with the naked eye, if you had good vision, is about 80 to 100 microns, right? So the average person's muscle cell, if you pulled it out and stuck it on a table, you wouldn't be able to see it. It's too small to see with the naked eye, too narrow, right? But it's the full length of your muscle. And so a muscle is made up of a bundle of those fibers, just like, strands of spaghetti, although spaghetti is not a really good one, not a good metaphor because it's rigid.
That's what I was envisioning, strands of spaghetti, no?
I think maybe strands of yarn, strands of wool, right? So think about, like wool that you knit a jumper or a scarf with, right? So think about, so each muscle fiber is actually made up of, inside the muscle fiber, there are contractile proteins, and the actin-myosin, they do their little caterpillar walk along each other, right?
I love whenever that pops up somewhere on my Instagram or Facebook, because I'm like, is this an animation? It's like, this is not an animation. So freaking cool.
Yeah, it is pretty cool.
Really cool.
So in each muscle cell, which is a cylinder, right, it's basically, imagine like some strands of yarn, some strands of wool, right? Yarn, we're in Australia, so we say yarn, but it's Y-A-R-N. So if you were in the US, you would have saw it yarn.
Yarn. Yarn, y'all.
So
I've been practicing.
You sound like you're from New York to me.
Thank you.
I can't tell the difference. I've talked to a few people in the US, and I learned something recently that really surprised me. They said, are you from Australia or the UK? And I was like, what do you mean? And they're like, we can't tell the difference. Your accents sound the same to us.
Wow. I'm going to assume that everyone from the UK is highly offended at that. Because when I lived in the UK, so I lived in Stratford-upon-Avon for a couple of years, Shakespeare country in the Midlands.
Did you run into Shakespeare?
I went to Shakespeare's. I did not, because he's long dead, but I got to go in his house where he grew up. Tell you what, they were short. Like you, and I'm not a tall person, and I had to do the big stoop to get under the doors.
Didn't do enough Pilates. There's your problem.
Well, they
right
did
there.
things like they literally threw, and we're really digressing, but it's a fun story. They literally threw their poo out the window into their garden.
Good fertiliser.
They fertilised. Well, and we wonder why the plague and all whatnot. But anyway, where were we going with this? Oh, accents. So I was actually managing an accessorised store on the high street, and I was the only Aussie in the village. So it wasn't like if you went to London and, you ended up with a whole heap of expats. And oh my God, my accent was so amplified to me back into my ears, and how horrendous it is that every single thing we say sounds like a question. Like we go up, 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 up. English people don't go up, they go down. So I learned that, and I learned to go down. And then when I moved home, my brother goes, "Gee, you sound like a wanker." I went, okay, cool. That got it out of me pretty quick. Thanks, Nick. Shout out to my brother Nick for that one. And a few other hard, cold truths. Anyway, we digress. So yeah, accents. So I don't think we sound English, but that's unusual. So Americans think Aussies and English sound the same.
Could you tell a difference if you just listen to two people, one's from like, say, Connecticut and one's from Wisconsin? Could you tell a difference?
No, I could probably hear little subtleties. The one I stuff up a lot is Canadians versus Americans, and they don't love it when you stuff that up. Yeah.
Anyway, all right.
Back to muscles.
Muscle fibers. So each muscle fiber. So think about each muscle fiber. It's this long cylinder. It's the full length of your muscle. One cell is one fiber, and each cell is a cylinder. It's made up of think of the inside of it of like some maybe 2-inch or 5 centimeter bits of wool, bits of yarn, right? That you knit a scarf with. And so maybe like imagine a piece of yarn, a couple inches long, and then, a whole bundle of those. So maybe like 10 or 20 or 30, bits of 2-inch yarn all sort of side by side. And you kind of got your finger, you're holding them around in your hand so that they poke out each end, and it's kind of like this, just a cylinder, made of wool, right? And imagine they're like, let's make them kind of a taupe colour, sort of a greeny, aqua-y, kind of bit bluey, a nice taupe. And then we've got another set of and that would be the actin fibres, right? ACTIN, one of the two contractile proteins. And then you've got myosin, which is the other contractile protein. And let's make them, I don't know, what colour should we make the myosin fibres? We've got taupe. What else? Yellow. Okay. You're not like goldenrod or...
Golden then.
Okay.
What colour are they really?
I don't know.
Red?
In books, they're usually red or yellow.
Yeah.
Yeah. But who knows what the actual colours are? Because I think when we see them under electron microscopes, they're always stained.
Right.
So it's like they're just the colour of the stain.
Yeah.
So anyway, well, they're golden, right?
Golden, okay.
In our example, right?
Uh-huh.
And so it's just another set of 2-inch long yarn strands that are golden, right? And so in a little group, like squished together, and so basically, and now let's kind of interleave them. So like we've got they're end to end, right? And then we slide them into each other so that the strands interleave, right? So the golden strands and the taupe strands, the kind of aqua bluey strands they're all kind of intermixed. They're alternating, right? Interdigitating. But not the whole lot, right? Only half of the length of each of those things, bundles, is overlapped, right? And so each end of that whole big set of strands now is, one end's taupe, the other end's golden, and in the middle it's like half and half because they're all mixed together. Can you picture it?
Yep.
All right, so those are the contractile proteins, and so a muscle is just made up of, that's called a sarcomere, right? That little bundle of proteins, and then the muscle is just made up of shitloads of them, end to end to end to end to end.
Technical term, shitloads.
And so what happens is those proteins, they basically connect and pull each other along. They squeeze each other.
Like a little caterpillar.
Right. So the strands sort of pull together until the overlap is complete. Right. They completely overlap, and all of the strands along the whole muscle do that simultaneously, and that shortens the overall length of the muscle, and then they can relax, and then that allows it to lengthen out again. So that's the basic sort of thing of how a muscle, what a muscle is, and so then that's one muscle fiber, right? And then, how do we make that contract? Well, we've got a nerve that goes to it from your brain, goes through your spinal cord. In your brain and spinal cord, that's called your central nervous system. And then when the nerve exits your spinal cord, it's the same nerve, but all of a sudden it's called your peripheral nervous system because we've just made that name. And then it goes to the muscle fiber, and it attaches onto the muscle fiber, and that is called a motor nerve because it tells the muscle fiber to move. Right? So that motor nerve innervates the muscle fiber, and when you send a signal down that motor nerve and it gets to the muscle fiber contracts, right? You release calcium, and anyway, it doesn't matter what you do. But all right, but what we actually have is in our body is we've got many fibers that have one motor nerve for that fiber, but then often we have one motor nerve that innervates like 2 or 3 or 4 or 10 or 50 or 100 or 400 fibers with just one nerve, right? So some muscle fibers just have one motor nerve that goes to that fiber, right? So we can turn that fiber on or off. And then some muscle fibers are in a group of 3 or 5 muscle fibers, right? And the motor nerve that innervates all of those fibers has little, like, splits off little bits at the end, right? And innervates all 5 fibers, say. And so whenever we send a signal down that nerve, all 5 muscle fibers contract, right? So you can either contract all those 5 muscle fibers together, or you can not contract them together, right? And then we have other, some fibers are in bigger bundle, and that group of muscle fibers plus the nerve that innervates it is called a motor unit, right? That's just muscle fiber. So basically you can turn on a motor unit, but you can't turn on part of a motor unit because the on switch turns all the lights on at once, right? You can't just turn on some of the lights. And so we have these motor units, and some motor units are just one muscle fiber, and some are 2 or 5 or 10 or 100, and we've got motor units that are up to 400, 500 muscle fibers in our body, right? And so, why would we have, motor units with, some muscle fibers with one motor neuron, right, motor nerve going to one fiber, and then other muscle fibers with one motor nerve going to like 25 muscle fibers? Why would we have that?
It's a great question. I don't know. Do you know the answer? I'm assuming you do. I have zero clue.
Well, if we had 25 nerves going to 25 muscle fibers, instead of one nerve going to 25 muscle fibers, we'd need 25 times more nerves.
Right, we need more nerves. But So I get that we need more nerves, but why is there a distinction between some only need the one and others need multiple?
Well, do you know why we don't just have more nerves? Like, why wouldn't we just have 25 times more nerves?
I want to say something that's going to sound really dumb, so I'm not going to say anything. I've got like this really fun cartoon image in my head of maybe how big your brain would have to be.
That's exactly right.
Oh my God, okay.
Well, inside your spinal, your vertebrae, right? Yeah. You've got a nerve canal, right? There's a little tube that goes down the back part of your spinal
it'd have to get really
column, right? And all of your brain, has axons that go down through there, like just long tails on the nerves. That's your spinal cord, right? Your spinal cord is just part of your brain, right? And so if we had 25 times more nerves, well, that would be 25 times thicker, right? So your spine would have to be, instead of like 2 inches wide, it would have to be like 4 feet wide, right? See the problem?
Yeah.
So we have to economise.
We would be really unusual looking, wouldn't we?
Yeah.
We would just look totally different. Like we would have evolved to look totally different.
And not to mention in your actual brain as well, exactly like you said, like if we had 25 times more, connectors in there, we'd have to have 25 times more nerves, and a nerve is a brain cell, like brain cells are nerves,
so
right?
The image now I'm getting, it's less cartoon and it's more alien. You know how they always do aliens with the massive heads?
Yeah.
There we go.
So we have these motor units that are, multiple muscle fibers innervated by a single nerve because it's for economy, right? It's cheaper.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
And after we take a little break, we'll come back and talk about your question about why we have some with 1 and some with 25. Why don't we just have them all with 5 each?
Yeah. Let's be even more economical.
Yeah.
Fuck, I'm not as dumb as I thought. Edit that bit out.
No, leave it in.
As dumb as I thought. That gets an edit, whoever's editing this.
So before the break, Chloe just figured out that you did.
That I'm not as dumb as I thought. Is that what you're about to say?
You figured out, what I was going to say is you figured out the reason why we don't just innervate every single muscle fibre with its own nerve is because our spine would have to be like 4 feet wide and our head would have to be like 10 feet wide.
Oh, it's funny.
So, and that's the correct answer.
Isn't it funny? I was like, I'm not going to say it, but this is really what I'm thinking it is. So, yeah, you go.
So the next question is, well, if we can have, one muscle fibre, like 25 muscle fibres innervated by one nerve, why don't we just have all of them, 25, why don't we save even more space? Well, the answer is, it's to do with the fineness of control that we need at each muscle fibre, right?
Yeah.
So if you've got a muscle, say, that's got 100 fibres in it, right? And you've got 100 nerves innervating, like one nerve innervating each fibre, right? And you want to turn, you wanted to have control over how strongly you contract that muscle. So think like a volume knob, right? And imagine the volume knob goes from 0 to full, right? And it's got 100 positions, right? You can turn it in 100 increments, right? So you can turn it up to, 9%, 13%, 21%, whatever percentage you want, right? You can do it in 1 degree increments. Whereas imagine now that you've got that same muscle with 100 muscle fibers, but you've got 4 motor units, each of which has 25 fibers, right? So I've only got 4 motor nerves going to that muscle now, and each one controls 25 fibers. Well, now your volume knob only has 4 positions on it, right? So you can have it off, you can have it a quarter of full power, you can have it half of full power, you can have it 3/4 of full power, or you can have it full power. Those are your 4 options, right? So you've got much less fine control over that muscle.
So I'm thinking things like hands.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fingers, you want to have
fingers?
Like small motor units, right? Like 1-to-1.
Right.
Like maybe the muscles that control your eye, your oculomotor muscles, right? Maybe some of your facial muscles for those fine expressions and things like that, you know. So, and your vocal cords, to subtly alter the tone of your voice and stuff,
Yeah, cool. Makes total sense.
And where would you guess you'd have like, a motor unit with 400 muscle fibers in it or 500 muscle fibers in it? Anybody? Were you going to say in your quadriceps?
So sorry, my brain just. Oh, I just lost my brain for a moment. Sorry, I just got a little bit confused whether you're meaning that is more or less.
Yeah, so if you had a motor unit with 400 or 500 muscle fibers in it, so that's one nerve that innervates 400 muscle fibers.
Gotcha.
Right?
Abs, maybe, like rectus abdominis?
Yeah, maybe rectus abdominis. I'm thinking like your vastus lateralis and your leg, your big outside quadriceps,
Right.
maybe some of your hamstrings and things like that. Like things where you basically, when you want to use your quadriceps, you're not going to be like, doing fine motor skills with them.
Gotcha.
Like you want to produce force,
Yep.
with them.
Calf muscles.
Yeah, probably calf muscles, things like that.
Yeah.
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 Bam.
Glutes.
Yeah. Probably glutes as well, right?
Cool.
Because if you want to turn your quadriceps on at 50%, it's much easier to just press one button that does that rather than having to turn on 50 light switches to turn on the 50 lights, right? It's literally less energy because it takes energy to produce
Would
nerve
it be
impulses.
muscles that we need to, like if I'm thinking back from an evolutionary perspective and thinking about, having to get away from the hairy mammoth that's coming towards you or the tiger or the whatever danger, like just those muscles where you just need to
Right.
run?
So exactly like if you come into your house and, if you have lots and lots of lights around your house and each light has its own light switch. So if you want all the lights on, you have to turn on every single light, right?
Yeah.
But that allows you, if you want it dim, you can just turn on one light or just two lights or whatever. And so that gives you a lot more fine control. But if you want to turn on all the lights, it takes longer, right? Whereas if you just got one master switch by the front door and it just turns on and off all the lights, just one switch for the whole house, right? Well, you've got zero control over how fine the light is, but you can turn on everything really quick.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's probably more the case in your quadriceps and your glutes and your calf muscles and things like that.
Yeah. Cool. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So it's also the case that within each muscle, right? So it's not really the case that, there's one muscle that's got like every muscle fiber's got its own nerve and other muscles where it's like only 500 muscle fibers per nerve. Like every muscle has some, smaller motor units with just a few muscle fibers, right? And then some medium-sized ones and then some bigger ones, right? But in your things like your fingers and your eyes and whatever, you've probably got more smaller ones, right? And in your thighs and your butt and whatever, you've probably got more bigger ones, right? And so in every muscle there are, motor units that are small, medium and large. Okay. And when we contract the muscle just a little bit, we contract the small motor units. We turn on just one of the lights, around the room. And when we want to contract the muscle powerfully, then we kick in the bigger motor units as, because you turn on one switch, it turns on 500 muscle fibers. Bam. That's easier, right? And so they're always recruited in order. Right. So if you do a low level task, you always recruit the low, the small motor units. Right. And then if you do like a medium intensity task, like you lift up something, moderately heavy, right, you always recruit those low, small muscle motor units and then also the middle-sized motor units, right? And it's only when you do a really high intensity task that's the only time you recruit those high end, those bigger, 400 muscle fiber motor units, right? So if you're just walking around, having a cup of tea, sitting on the sofa, typing on your computer, talking on the phone, doing all that normal stuff that people do, you're basically just recruiting your, small and maybe your medium motor units, right? And basically those high motor units, what they call the high threshold motor units, because they only work when you really pump out a strong nerve signal, you basically don't recruit them from one day to the next in just your normal everyday activities. Is this still making sense?
Yeah, I think so. I'm with you.
And so now we come back to, now that we have this picture, we come back to DOMS and its relationship with soreness, right? And so it turns out that now I wouldn't say that this is settled science yet, but I'd say it's getting there. It's relatively settled. That it seems pretty clear that the primary stimulus for increasing muscle strength, right? So when you exercise, right, and then you get stronger after, like what happens inside the muscle that triggers the muscle to get stronger, right? How does the muscle know to get stronger, right? Well, it turns out that the primary thing that triggers that is high levels of mechanical tension, right, on individual muscle fibers, right? So if you put a high level of tension on one muscle fiber, that muscle fiber will be triggered to get stronger, right? But if you don't put a high level of tension on the fiber next door, then the fiber next door won't get stronger, right? So the muscle, quote unquote, doesn't get stronger. It's like individual fibers either get stronger or not, right? And when all of the fibers get stronger, well, that's when the muscle gets stronger. And so high levels of tension is the main trigger for muscle fibers getting stronger, right? So when you apply a high level of tension to a muscle fiber, that's what stimulates it to get stronger. In fact, how do they know this? Well, lots of rats have donated their bodies to science to understand the answer to this question. And so what they do is they...
I just did a little sad face for those that those that maybe can't see me. I just did a little bit, Look, I'm not a huge rat fan, but, you know, it seems a bit mean.
I imagine the rats probably don't enjoy it.
No. But, so what do they do to the rats?
Well, so basically what they do is they get the, you know, stick electrodes in the rat's muscle. Right. And then they stimulate that muscle maximally. So they basically put electric current through the muscle, which is simulates a nerve impulse to that muscle, right? So, you know, if you put an electricity through a muscle, it turns the muscle on, right? So if they know how many volts to put through the muscle to maximally stimulate the muscle, so they fully recruit all of the muscle fibers. You with me?
Enough. I'm still thinking about the rats. I'm thinking, like, why can't we do this shit to humans? If it's that important.
You'll find out in a minute.
Okay. Was there not another way we could figure this out without torturing animals?
And so they measure how much tension the muscle develops. You know, like they have a dynamometer there to see, you know, measure how much tension the muscle develops. Yeah. And then they also do another thing where they get the muscle and they just passively stretch it. You know, they put it in like a brace or something and they put a weight on the end to passively stretch it, right? And they passively stretch it until it develops exactly the same amount of tension, right? So far we're producing active tension by the muscle contracting, right? And then in a second group of rats, they produce passive tension by just stretching the muscle, pulling on the muscle.
Gotcha.
Right? But they're producing the exact same amount of tension in both situations.
Understand.
Right? And in the third group, we stimulate the muscle as before, but we inject some proteins in there that basically prevent the muscle from contracting. We block the myosin. Right? So basically the muscle is trying to contract, so it's activating, like all of the chemical things inside the muscle are happening, you know, calcium's released, blah, 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 stuff's happening. But we can't process ATP in the myosin, so the muscle doesn't develop any force, right? So there are three conditions. One is where the muscle contracts maximally, right, and produces force. The other one is where the muscle is stretched passively and produces the same amount of force, right?
That's my water, everyone. I'm really sorry. Sorry.
No. And the third one is where the muscle contracts but doesn't actually produce any force, right? And then we cut the muscles out of the rats, and this is why you can't do it on humans.
Right. The rat's now
deceased.
Yes, good.
And
not good that the rat's deceased, but you know.
Yeah, so then we cut the muscles. We wait a little bit, a couple of hours, cut the muscles out of the rats, and then they measure basically the signaling protein that signals the muscles to grow stronger. Right, it's called mTORC1. Okay, and what they find is that in the active contraction group, there's a lot of it there, like the muscle's going to get stronger. In the stretching group, it's the same amount of mTORC1. Right, so basically, if you stretch a muscle with equal force as it's contracting, it's going to get bigger to the same degree. Whereas in the third group, where they just contract the muscle but doesn't produce force, no protein signaling. So what that basically tells us is tension on a muscle fiber is what stimulates the muscle to get stronger, not whether the muscle is activated. It's just the amount of tension that's on the fiber. That is, now, normally tension on the fiber and activating the muscle go together, right? But it's actually the tension that produces the force that stimulates muscle strengthening, not the activation. All right. So we know that tension stimulates muscle to get stronger, right? then we have this other line of research that looks at like, okay, does muscle damage, if we damage the muscles a little bit, does that stimulate them to grow stronger, to rebuild stronger than before, right? And the short answer to that is no. So when we basically have groups of people that work, say if you were doing your leg press the other day, right? What did you do, 10 reps, something like that?
No, I did less because I wanted to.
Awesome. How many reps did you do?
I didn't go past 8.
Awesome.
I was going for stimulating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So just say you did.
I've learned from you, Raph.
You have.
I don't just go to the gym and go, I'm going to do 20 reps.
Right. So just say you do your 8 reps, right?
Yeah.
How many sets did you do?
3.
Right. So you did 24 reps altogether, right? So just say you did,
And I did my proper weight time in between as well.
Freaking awesome. So if you'd been enrolled in this particular study, you would have done 3 sets of 8, but you would have just done a 30-second rest in between, so much shorter rest.
Oh, right, okay.
The goal was to fatigue.
Oh, okay.
The goal was to get us fatigued. So it would be 8 reps to failure,
right,
with a 30-second rest in between, right? So you imagine how sore
and
you'd
then
be.
you have to pump another 8 out.
Yeah,
My God.
So this was like hardcore. The goal was to try and damage the muscles.
Wait a second,
right?
they're doing this to humans or rats?
Humans.
Humans now, okay.
Right? And then the other group does the same number of reps, but it's 1 rep every minute for 24 minutes. Right, so just imagine hop on the leg press, the same weight that you had on, 1 rep, hop off, walk around. Come back a minute later, 1 more rep, right? So basically you never get anywhere near failure, right? But you do the same total number of reps, right? So you have the same total amount of tension on your muscles, right? And we do that for 12 weeks, and then we measure the circumference of your thigh, and we find out whose muscles got bigger, and guess what we find? No difference, right? And we measure how much stronger you got, like how much you can increase, how much you can press, no difference. So what we find is that a more damaging workout doesn't seem to produce superior strength gains or muscle growth compared to a less damaging workout of the same amount of volume. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. So DOMs are only, to loop it back, DOMs are only experienced if there has been damage.
Yeah.
If there hasn't been damage, regardless of whether there's been muscle growth or not, you won't have DOMs.
Right.
Right.
So to get stronger, you need to put high levels of tension on your fibers, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
And
you know what?
Yeah.
Ba-boom. I think I've always been under kind of sort of the impression that to get stronger, it is, for want of a better word, you're causing some muscle damage.
And
like a muscle growth equals damage. That's not accurate though, is it?
No, it's a very common misconception though. Like it's a super common belief amongst like bodybuilders and
that's why you have
and
your protein after your workout and whatnot to help counteract that. I'm just saying this is a very common narrative. So I'm sure that there are people listening right now who have probably thought exactly as I have thought.
Yeah. So you should have protein after your workout. Well, it doesn't matter if you have it straight after the workout, but just you should have you should have a diet that has enough protein in it. And that's true.
Yes.
But
it's not got to do with muscle damage.
Well, after you work out, if you work out effectively, there's muscle protein synthesis, the building of proteins within the muscle increases, right? You build more proteins, right? The actinomycin are proteins. You build more actinomycin. The more actinomycin you pack inside that muscle, the wider the cells get, the more contractile force you can generate because you've got more units, pulling on each other, right? And so that's what makes you, that's the main thing that makes you stronger when you do exercise. And so to build more protein, actinomycin, right? Well, you got to build protein out of amino acids.
Got it.
And so to have amino acids in your bloodstream, you've got to eat enough protein because protein's made of amino acids. And so if you don't have enough dietary protein, you can't really get stronger.
So back to that study. Sorry, whether there was damage or not damage, the strength gains were the same?
Yes. And this has been, there are many lines of evidence on this. Like, for instance, there's a study where they looked at something that I'm pretty interested in is velocity loss. So basically, rather than sort of going to failure, they basically put a device like an inertia sensor, like a GPS thing, right, on the bar or the weight or the kettlebell or whatever, and they measure how fast it's moving, right?
Do you have that?
I've got one at home.
Yeah, I thought you did.
And it tracks the speed of the bar, and you try and move the bar or the weight as quickly as you can. And of course, as you get tired, you move more slowly, right? You can't move as quickly when you're tired, right? And as you get more and more tired, you move more and more slowly until eventually you move so slowly that you stop moving, right? And that's called reaching failure.
Right. Yeah.
And so the first or second or third rep is always the fastest rep, right? It's never your 10th rep that's the fastest rep.
Right? Makes sense.
So, and anyone who's ever done push-ups towards failure has experienced this, right? You slow down before you stop. And so a lot of research over the last sort of 5 years has looked at stopping, at certain percentage of velocity loss, right? So if we keep going until we say we lose 40% of our speed, or 50% of our speed, or 20% of our speed, or 5% of our speed, how does that affect how much strength we get? If we could do that 3 times a week for 12 weeks, is one better or worse than the other, or they're all about the same or whatever? And what we find is that basically anything from 5%, if you do no velocity loss, right, you get less strength gains, right? So if you can do 10 reps and you just do 1 rep, and then wait 3 minutes and do 1 more rep, right, you're not going to maximize your strength gains, right? But if you go to the point where you're getting about a 5% velocity loss, which say if you could do 10 reps, right, that would be somewhere around 4 to 5 reps, right? So about half of your full, reps that you could do. Anywhere from 5% on up, you'll get the same strength gain. So if you do 5% velocity loss, or you do 10 or 20 or 40 or 50 or failure, you will get the same amount of strength gains.
Okay.
Even though in the 5%, so if you were doing your 8 reps on the leg press, right, at a 5% velocity loss, you probably would have done 4 reps per set at that weight. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I find all the percentages and whatnot hard to but I'm getting what you're saying. I've
found with my because I've got an inertial sensor.
It seems quite complex to me.
Well, it really is pretty. The science behind it is kind of complex, but it really is pretty simple, right? I've got a velocity sensor at home, like you said, and I use it when I work out, right? And it beeps at me when I'm slow down past a certain point, right? And so what I've learned is that when I'm working, when I first notice that I'm slowing down, that's about a 20% reduction in speed, right? So I can detect when I'm 20% slower, right? So if I'm, say, 5 or 10% slower, I can't notice that. I'm not tuned enough in to pick that up, right? So the first time I notice, I'm starting to slow down, that's about 20% reduction in speed, right? So basically, the take-home message, if you wanted to get as strong as possible with the least possible effort, which seems like a good plan to me, would be as soon as you start to notice you're slowing down, stop. Right. The first rep where you're I think that was a little bit slower, that's when you should stop. And that might be 3 or 4 or 5 reps from failure.
Okay.
And if you go closer to failure, you get more damage, you get more soreness, but you don't get more strength.
Let's apply this to a Pilates setting. Let's apply this to the group Pilates class, the group reformer class, where peeps coming in for that ab burn, that butt burn in those scooters. They want to feel the fire during the class. A couple of peak moments in the class where it's oh my God, I'm shaking. There's no way I can do any more. And then the instructor pushes you through those last couple of reps. You're like, oh my God, yes. And then you wake up the next morning and you've got a really sore butt. You have a laugh and you got to realise your abs are really sore.
And you think, what an awesome class that was.
What an awesome class. I'm
going Chloe, back to she's a genius.
Going back to that instructor.
So, all right. So I'm assuming that if you're listening to this, you already know how to make people's abs burn and their butts burn.
It's kind of like the bread and butter
That's
of a
job
Pilates
description,
instructor.
So
We all know how to do
I
that.
I won't insult your intelligence by
Telling us how to do
telling you
it.
how to do that.
We know how to do it, yeah.
But if you wanted to maximize DOMs, there's something you can do.
Well, I'm sorry. I don't like now. I'm feeling a little bit conflicted. Do I freaking want to maximize DOMs, Raph? Would the flip, like with the other thing being like, should we be shining the light and saying, well, you actually DOMs are something you don't want, and here are the reasons why? I don't know. I'm conflicted now.
Well, I would say, that's an ethical question that each of us has to find our own answer to. For my own personal self, I try and avoid DOMs wherever possible because I don't enjoy being sore and it doesn't enhance the effectiveness of the workout. So why put myself through it?
So why do you think I was so freaking sore the other day after I did my leg press?
So here's the thing. We don't know exactly what causes DOMs, right? It's related to exercise-induced muscle damage, right? But it's not the same thing as exercise-induced muscle damage, like I said at the start. But we do know the situations that cause DOMs, right? So we don't know the actual physiology of what causes it, but we do know the activities that cause it. And it's unaccustomed exercise, particularly exercise at long muscle lengths.
Awesome. There we go.
So when you do unaccustomed exercise, and particularly unaccustomed exercise at long muscle lengths, that's your formula for DOMs, right? So this is something called the repeated bout effect. So basically when you do a workout for the first time, you get sore, right? But if you repeat that workout again within a week, you get a lot less sore the second time, and then less sore again the third time. And by the time you get to the 10th time, it's like it doesn't even, touch the sides. It just goes down smooth, right? But if you do a different workout, right? So, you do a lot of Pilates, right? You do Pilates pretty much every day, right? But then you went to the gym and did one session of leg press and you couldn't walk for almost a week, right?
Correct.
Now, that's not because you're not in shape. It's because that particular exercise was unaccustomed for you,
right?
And leg press, I happen to know, it bends your knees right up into your chest, right? So your glutes and your adductors are going through a long muscle length like that, and your quads, like it's end range.
Yeah, and I was saying it was interesting because I expected that I would have some quad DOMs,
but it's mainly your glutes and your adductors.
My butt and my adductors,
because those are the ones that are stretched maximally in that exercise.
The most residual discomfort were the adductors.
Yeah. Well, as
the leg press,
as you flex your hip, beyond 90 degrees, the adductor magnus, which is the biggest of the adductors, becomes a really powerful hip extensor.
Right.
And so the more you flex your hip, the more the adductors are involved in hip extension, right? And so anyone who's ever done a lot of lunges, deep lunges, and then had sore inner thighs the next day, has experienced that. So to increase DOMs, right, you need an unaccustomed workout. Right? So if you just give the same workout but do an extra 10 reps or whatever on everything, or add more springs, it's not going to give you anywhere near the effect as if you go, hey, we do lunges all the time, let's do front splits, right? Or let's do side splits for inner thighs instead tonight, right? Just an unaccustomed movement, right? And it doesn't have to be like I've never done it before. It just has to be I'm not in the habit of doing it, right? So if you do Pilates every day, if you stop doing Pilates for 1 week and then you went to Pilates, you would get sore.
Oh, well, I did one of Shaman's recorded masterclasses, and he did this hellish superset of shout out to Shaman, superset of scooters on progressively loading the springs, and I was having to hold on to the foot bar for dear life for the last one. I was cursing the screen, shaking. I was frickin' sore the next day.
Because it was unaccustomed.
Frickin' sore.
Right? So you've done that movement before, but you've done it with a really light spring probably, right?
Yeah.
It's more about standing leg.
Yeah.
Right? So this is the pushing with the moving leg is an unaccustomed exercise for you.
Yes.
Right? And so that's your secret weapon to create DOMs, is just do unaccustomed exercise, which doesn't mean the person's never done the movement before. It means they're not in the habit of doing that movement, say, over the last 2 weeks. So if you sort of rotated your class programming, right, there are certain exercises that you would rely on for a week or two, and then switch it to the same muscle groups but different movements.
Okay, so this brings me to another point. So the burning during the class, right, doesn't equate to DOMs afterwards at all. Exactly, because I'm sure that when you're lifting your heavy weights, like you're getting, like I'm assuming you get to a point where it feels unpleasant in the moment. Oh, no. No?
No pain.
Okay. Even in those deep squats you don't feel...
Yeah, here's the thing. So have we done with DOMs?
Are we done with DOMs?
I reckon we are.
We're almost done. I feel almost done.
All right.
You don't feel any in those squats. You don't feel anything?
All right, let's talk about the burning, right?
Yeah, that's what I want to talk about.
So the burn that you feel in your muscles during a workout is not the same thing as DOMs, like you say, right?
Yeah.
And it's
not going to equal DOMs.
And it doesn't equal DOMs, right? You can have a burn without DOMs, a burn with DOMs, DOMs with a burn, DOMs without a burn. It's like they're just not the same thing, right? And so the burn that you feel during an exercise, right? So you're holding your side plank and your shoulders burning, or you're doing your clams and your butt's burning, or you're doing your lunges and your thighs burning, or whatever, right? So that burn is related to free hydrogen ions, or in other words, your acid inside your muscles, right? So when you produce force in your muscles for sustained periods at a high enough level, like say sustained periods, say more than 30 seconds, right? So if you're working on a one muscle group or whatever for say, even more than 10 seconds in some cases, but let's say like 10 seconds plus, right? The energy system that you use inside that muscle produces hydrogen ions as a byproduct, right? So it's like the exhaust that comes out of the back of the car, right? In this case, the exhaust that comes out of the back of your muscle cell, right, includes hydrogen ions, right? Now, hydrogen ions are acidic, right? So you've heard of hydrochloric acid, right? So hydrogen's part of that. So acidic. And so, when you get a lot of hydrogen ions building up inside your muscle cell itself becomes acidic, which it doesn't like, right? So just imagine if we injected some hydrochloric acid into your muscles, that's the same feeling, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the burn, right? And so that discomfort says that your muscles are working at a high enough level, you're producing these hydrogen ions and your muscles becoming acidic, right? And as soon as you stop working the muscle, well, your circulation clears out the hydrogen ions and it goes away, right? But that doesn't tell you whether you had high levels of mechanical tension on that muscle fibre, and it doesn't tell you whether you did any damage to that muscle fibre.
I gotcha. This is also interesting. So there's a comment, and I know we're almost done, but there's two things I don't know if we've touched on. So there's a common misconception with DOMs that it's a buildup of lactic acid.
Yeah, that's not true. Yeah.
Just that's the answer. That's not true, because that's a very common narrative.
Yeah.
And I used to say it myself. I've said that to clients before.
Yeah, and this is only over the probably last 3 to 5 years that this science has emerged, or I've become aware of it, that actually that theory of lactic acid producing that soreness has been kind of discredited.
Okay.
Lactic acid is produced in your muscles as you work, but it's then converted into pyruvate and recycled and used as an important energy substrate within
Pyruvate.
Yeah.
Pyruvate.
Yeah.
I've heard that word in my life.
Pyruvate, pyruvate. Yeah.
And what is pyruvate?
It's just I'm going to have to explain the whole Krebs cycle here.
It's pyruvate.
It's just basically when you break down glucose inside your muscle cells to produce energy. Okay. One of the byproducts is lactate, which you can then convert into pyruvate, which is basically sort of like a part of a glucose molecule, right? It's with a few bits snipped off it.
How do you keep this stuff in your head, Raph? Without having the alien-sized head.
But I can't, honestly, there's so many things I can't remember. We were driving, to the local milk bar the other day, or local cafe the other day. My wife was like, turn left here. I'm like, you sure? She's like, yes, we've been here 100 times before. I'm like,
that makes me feel better. I'm like, you remember something like pyruvate? I've never heard that in my entire existence. Okay.
So anyway, I know pyruvate, but
I remember it now.
I don't know a lot of other things.
Okay, good. That makes me feel better. Okay, cool. Now, there's a really extreme sort of DOMs, which the one where your muscles actually...
rhabdo.
Yeah, what's it called?
Rhabdomyolysis, yeah. And that's basically where you do so much damage to your muscles, there's so much rupture of muscle cell, there's so many inner bits of muscles floating around in your bloodstream that your bloodstream becomes septic, right? Because that's now dead tissue floating around in your bloodstream.
Right.
There's that muscle's no longer living, it's dead, right? So you've basically taken a bit of a dead rat and injected it into your bloodstream.
Bloody hell.
So that's a life-threatening situation.
Yes. because I've read a few horror stories about that, particularly with athletes.
Yeah, and this is like, this is not
is
going to
not
happen
the
in a
Pilates
Pilates
class,
no.
guys. It's
this
not
is
the Pilates
like
class,
ultra marathon,
Yeah.
4 days across the,
Yes.
Nevada desert or something,
Yeah.
or the CrossFit Games person who's,
it was a CrossFit game actually that I read the
hours of
story
continuous
about.
lifting or something. It's like ridiculous.
And she ended up in hospital
Yeah.
and she said her thighs had like blown up. And
Right. You got dead bits of you floating around inside you.
So it's like taking DOMs to the absolute extreme length.
Yeah.
Wow.
Can I just finish off with one thing about the squat? Like
Yes.
when I do a deep squat, like
Yeah.
a heavy squat, and why I don't get pain.
Yeah.
So we said that the burn is the hydrogen ions, accumulating inside your muscle cell, right? Which hydrogen ions basically acidic,
Yep.
right? And so we said that was they're a kind of a byproduct of that breakdown of glucose when you burn glucose within your glucose within your blood cell, within your muscle cell to produce energy. We break the glucose down and release energy, and one of the things that we break it down into is hydrogen ions plus lactate plus this, right? And so the hydrogen ions are like kind of irritating to the cell. When you exercise at a higher intensity, right? So when your muscle cell's working harder, right, has to produce more force more quickly, right? Breaking down glucose is too slow, right? You can't burn the glucose fast enough to produce enough energy to contract the cell as quickly as you need to, right? So you need a quicker source of energy. So you use what's called phosphocreatine, which is it's another chemical that's stored within your muscle cell, right? And it's like this super high. Like imagine like if you were lighting a fire, right? The glucose is like the log that you put in there that's going to burn for ages, right? And it's going to produce lots of energy, but it takes a long time to produce that energy. Whereas the phosphocreatine is be like kerosene.
Wow.
Right?
Okay.
It was like, but then gone. Right? The kerosene is going to burn itself out in a few seconds, right? Whereas that log's going to last for hours, right? So if you're running a marathon or whatever, you're using glucose, right? But if you're lifting a maximal squat or a maximal deadlift, or you're doing a burpee or something like that, you're using phosphocreatine, right? The kerosene, right? You're burning kerosene, right? You've only got enough phosphocreatine stored in your muscle to last you about 10 or 12 seconds, right? So if you do anything that lasts for longer than 10 or 12 seconds, you run out of phosphocreatine. And that's why you can't sprint flat out, right? Absolutely flat out for more than 10 or 12 seconds, right? If you go for 20 seconds, you can't run as fast. Right? Because you have to go down to burning logs, right? Instead of kerosene.
Yep. Awesome analogy.
But the kerosene doesn't produce free hydrogen ions, right? So when you use phosphocreatine, I mean, think about it. You've done sprints. You do sprints all the time, right?
Sprinting.
So when you do a sprint, and I'm talking about sprint.
Don't know if I'm doing them all the time at the moment. That's like, let's keep things honest here. But there was a point where I was doing them all the time. Being a little slack on the sprints.
So I'm talking about like a 20 or 30 metre sprint, like a really short sprint, right? So short that it's maximum, and you almost don't even have to breathe the whole time. Like it's just so short. It's over before it starts almost, right? You don't get burning during that, do you? No burning, right? Same if you do Olympic.
Hard a little bit at the end, but
it gets harder.
My heart burns a little. I've always found that. Yeah.
Well, you're probably going longer than 10 seconds.
Right.
Then,
okay. Gotcha.
right? For the first 10 seconds, I guarantee you, no burning. Because you're using phosphocreatine, doesn't produce hydrogen ions, your cells don't become acidic, therefore no burn, right? But what does happen, right, if you're lifting something so heavy, right, or if you're doing, say, when I'm doing a squat, right, I do 3 reps, right? I'd make it so heavy that I can only do 3 reps, right? And that takes me 3 reps takes me like 4 seconds, 5 seconds, right? So I never run out of phosphocreatine, right? So I never produce free hydrogen ions, so I never get a burn.
Okay. So when we started this conversation, we kind of, I kind of said, is getting DOMs bad, right? Because you kind of like, it's muscle damage, and you said maybe sorta. But if we kind of looped through and gone, well, if you like DOMs, go for DOMs. If you don't like DOMs, don't. If your clients like them, produce them. You know how to produce them. Do you know what I mean? Like, where do we sit with it?
I would say my position is if people are coming to you with their wallets out saying, give me DOMs, please, here's my credit card, I would say, sure, how much DOMs would you like? You know, because I don't think you're actually harming those people, you know, in any significant way. And I think the benefits of exercise, you know, vastly outweigh, you know, the drawbacks of getting some DOMs. Right. You know, so you're way better to exercise and get DOMs than to not exercise. Right. It's just that's an open misère. Like that's an easy decision. Yeah. Right. So I don't have a problem with it. But if the person was like, oh gee, I love working out, but the soreness afterwards is kind of a downer, right? Then I'll be like, well, great, we don't have to have soreness afterwards. Right. We're not going to push near failure. We're going to stop as soon as you start to slow down. We're going to stop, right? And we're going to keep doing the same workout so you're accustomed to it. We're not going to mix it up all the time and go, hey, different, right? Or we could use our powers for evil and mix it up all the time and go near failure, and then you would get more DOMs, right? Yeah. And then I could, you know, charge you with a clear conscience. Yeah. But so is it bad? Maybe. Well, it is. You know, we said at the start that DOMS is not the same thing as muscle damage, right? But it's related to muscle damage, right? So when you get DOMS, that's probably a good indicator that there was some muscle damage, right? But, you know, more DOMS doesn't necessarily mean more muscle damage, and a DOMS sticking around for longer doesn't mean the muscle damage is sticking around for longer. But the fact that there's DOMS suggests that there's muscle damage, right? Now, when you work out, that stimulates your muscles to get stronger. You know, you put high levels of mechanical tension on the muscle fibers, that stimulates them to get stronger. And in getting stronger, you have to build more proteins, more actin and myosin within those fibers, right? Which means you need to synthesize or make, you know, construct those proteins within your cells. Your DNA is what makes proteins, right? So your DNA is busy churning out these proteins to make your muscles stronger. Now, if you damage those muscles, right? If you do a workout that damages those muscles, right? Well, muscles are made of protein, right? And you need to repair the muscles. In order to repair muscles, you've got to build or synthesize or manufacture protein, right? So the same DNA that is supposed to build the proteins that are going to make your muscles stronger is now the same factories repairing muscles, right? So if you've got one work crew, right, and you can say, okay, go and make that house better over there, right? Or if you say, okay, go and make that house better over there, but first I'm going to knock out this wall and you've got to fix it, right? It's going to take them longer to make it better, right? Because first they've got to fix the wall you knocked out, right? So now that's not an established fact yet, right? But that's the current thinking, as I understand it, in the scientific community. So the DOMS or the muscle damage, you know, possibly, I would say it's a possibly, retards the speed of how much you can increase your strength, because you're spending some part of that energy, instead of increasing strength, you're spending it on just repairing the damage that you caused.
Fascinating.
But I would say, like, for, you know, if you were an elite athlete, right, if you were like in the Olympics or at an elite level in some sport and your goal was to be as strong as possible, I would say let's avoid DOMS. Right. But because every 0.25%, you know, is important, right? But if you're just the average person going to Pilates, even someone who's a dancer or whatever, it's like being like 0.25% stronger is not going to really make any difference in your life. Yeah. You know, the fact that you're working out and doing some form of strengthening is like 10,000-fold better than not doing it. And having like an extra 0.25% on top of that is really like, who cares, right? So DOMS, no DOMS, whatever, who cares? You know, doesn't make any difference, I'd say. And if their credit card's out and they're ready to go, I would say sign here.
It's really, this conversation's really changed my mind about DOMs and about whether, you know, about me actively seeking them out and me giving validation to my, you know, level of workout. I think it was, do you know, I think if I wasn't getting DOMs, I was berating myself unconsciously, like I wasn't going, oh my God, you know, but now I'm sitting here and reflecting as we come to the end of this discussion and going in detail through, you know, what is really happening. I think I was putting myself down a bit if I wasn't getting DOMs and going, okay, well, you didn't work out hard enough. So this for me, Raph, and I'm potentially for some of our listeners as well, because I'm assuming they're going to be having light bulb moments like me, because I think a lot of, you know, how I've understood it is how the majority of us understand it. So maybe we can all have a bit of a moment and go, well, cool, got no DOMs today. Awesome. So I'm feeling more empowered by it, and I won't be an active DOM seeker from now on.
Well, I'm excited to hear that, Chloe.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. It's great. Super interesting, Raph.
It is pretty interesting,
Yeah,
isn't it?
my brain was really, like, had to work hard on that one. It was great. Thanks, Raph.
Good talk.
Yeah, great talk.